Think Forward. Think Research Channel.
Inside Stories, Conversations about Art and Ideas is an interview series at the University of Georgia hosted by Betty Jean Craige, director of the Willson Center for Humanities and Arts. Dr. Craige, joined by honors students, engages scholars and artists in discussions of their research. Together, they explore the ways scholarship and creative activity challenge received opinion and bring us new understandings of our world.
Today, Dr. Milton Masciadri, professor of music at the University of Georgia and world-renowned double bassist, is interviewed by Daniel Jordan, honors student and operations manager of the Journal for Undergraduate Research Opportunities, and Dr. Betty Jean Craige, university professor of comparative literature and director of the Willson Center for Humanities and Arts.
Hello, Milton. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Daniel, for participating in this conversation. We'll be talking about your life as a performing artist, a musician, a player of the double bass. And so let me ask you how you got to this position. How did you become a double bass player?
Well, in my case, it's a problem of family. My whole family, I'm the third generation of bassists. My grandfather, coming from Italy, was a bass player. My father is a bass player. So am I, following the tradition.
So is your son?
So is my son now, following the tradition. But there was a choice. Mm-hmm. Actually, my father wanted me to play another instrument. And I guess the more he insisted I perform another instrument, the more I wanted to play the larger one.
Why did he insist that you wanted to play another, or that you would play another instrument?
For the same reason I have tried to do the same thing with my son. You see that double bass is a large instrument, difficult to carry, difficult to move around with it, difficult to perform for the size. Repertoire is limited. It's primarily used in the orchestra most of the time. So he saw all those things, and he saw my anxieties on trying to perform the instrument, and so he wanted me to play the cello.
So he was an Italian who went to Uruguay. You grew up in Uruguay.
I was born in Montevideo, in Uruguay, and then when I was 11 years old, I moved to Brazil. Mm-hmm. So I have to do...
Because he was playing in the orchestra there?
He was the principal bass in the orchestra in Uruguay, and then went to the city of Porto Alegre, in the south of Brazil, and been the principal bass in the orchestra there. So the whole family transferred, moved to Brazil.
Was that considered a step up from the Uruguay symphony to the...
It's two different countries. It was an interesting move for him. Family-wise, financially-wise too. Obviously, those are considerations that he took. And for us, it was very interesting. We started life speaking Italian at home. My grandfather in Italian, the whole tradition. And then I have to do elementary school in Spanish, and then I have to jump into middle school in Portuguese. So it was fun.
How about your family now with your sons? What do you speak in your house?
Well, married to another Italian lady, we have to make a decision which language we will speak. We have grandparents that live in Italy right now, and we have grandparents that live in Brazil. One speak Italian, one speak Portuguese. But we both have the common ground of Uruguay and the Spanish. So we try, and also for the United States, Spanish is a much more used language. So we try to speak Spanish in the house. Well, both of them speak Spanish fluently. And they understand Portuguese and Italian.
You are a UNESCO Artist for Peace, one of some 15 musicians. And tell us a little bit about that. Do you think music makes for peaceful relations between people? Does it help?
Oh, it does. Well, it's the music is, the beauty of music is an international language. In any country, in any place that you go, I can develop my art, I can communicate without words, and makes it a prime instrument that nobody has to talk the same language to understand the expression of the music. With the music itself represented in many countries where I go and perform, there is always this connection on the UNESCO case of peacekeeping or usually fundraisers for important events, hospitals, children's endeavors. The first time I performed, when I got invited to be UNESCO artist, was in Paris, and was a concert for a hospital that was being built in Serbia, in Sarajevo, actually in Bosnia, and it was a children's hospital. So I got invited to that, but at that time I was not a UNESCO artist. I was invited as a soloist to perform with a Russian orchestra. There were several other artists, and after the performance I got a letter being asked to go to the following morning to the office of the director of the UNESCO. And that time was the Spanish Federico Mayor, 1998. And since that time, I was designated UNESCO artist along with some other musicians. It's a small group, and I'm the only bass player on the group.
You were the only bass player? Is it?
Yeah, and the group of the UNESCO artists, I'm the only double bassist. There are several violinists and pianists.
Tell us a little bit about the double bass. What's its history, and what kind of wood is it made of?
Well, double bass is from the string instruments is the instrument that comes developed later. I mean, it comes from the viola da gamba, and in the case of the double bass from the violone, that is the larger viola da gamba. But really starts up solidifying itself in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. In the 19th century that we have the appearance of the modern bass as we know it today. Before there was the violone, that was a 6-string instrument, and then in Italy began to appear instruments with 3 strings. This instrument is built in 1690. It's an Italian Paolo Testore. There are not many left.
Can you tell us how you came across it?
Oh, it was an interesting story altogether. But anyway, there was a 3-string instrument, and in the early 20th century was switched to 4 strings, as the modern basses are. And nowadays in the orchestra you have 5-string basses. They're even larger instruments.
But this particular one, how did you get it?
I was performing in Uruguay, Montevideo, after I was already living in the United States at the time, and I went to be the soloist with the orchestra. And one of the bassists in the section of the symphony said, look, we have, this is instrument. It's very old, an Italian instrument. It's a smaller body size. Usually the performers in the orchestra don't like to use an instrument of a motor shape, but they call them bassettos, or small basses. They're good for solo performance. And you may like it. And I went to see it. It was abandoned in an apartment on a beach in Montevideo, in a beach apartment, and a horrible shape. For 25 years, nobody has performed it. It was brought from Italy by the founder of the symphony in Uruguay, one of the Italians that came on that time. And when the bass player died, his widow kept it because he was very affectionate to the instrument. But then nobody touched it. Then the widow passes away, and the son also was a bass player, but he never touches an instrument. It was in horrible shape. But to make the story short, I buy it, convince my wife to go ahead and purchase.
How did you know you'd like it?
Oh, well, it's an ugly, beautiful-looking instrument. You can see it's an old Italian, the wood and the way it was made. It's very special. Immediately you can tell they have some characteristics that are very unique. And I brought it to Athens, here to the United States, and for a year it sat in my house also without being repaired, and I only found out when I took it to New York to have it repaired. And I have spoken with a repairman that I had this old instrument that needed a lot of work, and that he would have a lot of time, but he couldn't take all the time he wanted to work on it.
What did you say you found out from
and
this
that's
man in
from
New York?
him I found out what it was. And I almost ended up in the hospital 5 minutes later. But
So the family that had it in the beach house, they had no idea.
They didn't know what they were selling. I didn't know what I was buying. I knew I was buying an old Italian instrument, but not exactly didn't know the maker at the time. So,
Do you have very many opportunities to play solo? on this instrument. It's normally not a solo instrument.
Well, the bass is not a solo instrument, and is something that I have developed my career on that, with that focus. I started playing the symphony full time, and then did university and came to the United States to study with one of the most famous soloists in the world. His name is Gary Carr, an American bass player from California, and he really put double bass as a solo instrument on the map in the world. There were several before him in past centuries, but indeed he really was the one who set new parameters for the instrument.
How do you mean that he set new parameters? Did he, start writing literature for it, or transcribing from other instruments?
Transcribing a lot of works, commissioning a lot of works, really being on the scene. His career was really launched by in New York, performing with the New York Philharmonic, and that's how, after that, he takes off on his solo career, and then attracts over his life as a professor. He attracts many students. When I came to study with him from Brazil, I was the only Latin American double bassist at the time, but most of from 14 students, 10 were from overseas.
And the double bass is used for classical music, but it's also used for jazz. Is that right?
Yeah, the bass have breached all the conditions. It's used in the symphony as a section instrument that supports all the harmony of the work. And I do perform in the orchestra. It's something that I never left, something that I still perform on a regular basis with orchestras. A passion that I have, and it's also something that helps me to work with my students. And then over the years, the solo career developed, and it became more busy with many performances, a lot of performances overseas, in Latin America, in Asia, in Europe, also in the United States. So it took a life of its own as the circle expanded and more people got acquainted with the instrument, and there are new compositions being written for the instrument.
Well, you perform all over the world. Can you detect a difference in the nationality of the performers? Is there a difference between the Japanese orchestra and orchestras in Europe? Can you hear the difference?
Well, the music is one. You will perform a Beethoven symphony with a Japanese orchestra, or the same bass concerto that you perform in Romania, you will do it in Tokyo or in Paris. But there are certain temperaments that you perceive. As a trained ear, you perceive textures, types of sound that the instruments, that the orchestra assume as almost like a personality, like famous today nowadays, the brass of the Chicago Symphony or the strings of the Philadelphia Orchestra. There are characteristics on their sound. And you perceive certain things, obviously, on Asian orchestras, on Eastern European orchestras, Western European orchestras, very different temperament. Although you are interpreting the same piece, and also with the conductor that you're working with at the time, and it brings a little bit of the personality too into the
Well, you mentioned that you've played Beethoven with Japanese orchestras, and you keep mentioning Western classical music that you play around the world. Are there compositions in Chinese and Japanese that are played in Western Europe and the United States?
Yes, we do. There are new compositions. If you go to, when I went to perform for UNESCO in Japan, the first performance, the first trip I took with them, there were several Japanese composers on the program, but composers I never heard, but they were quite pleasant to listen to. But these are new music that are beginning to appear right now. The history of Western music appears. There are the German and the Italian tradition, very prominent, the French tradition. Those are the core. Let's put it in the classical music. And then obviously the bass on its bridge to jazz and to other areas has the possibility to perform in other flavors too.
But the bass didn't really have a place in, or it doesn't really have one in the kind of older, the older Western kind of literatures for music. Is that right?
Well, the bass is present as an orchestral instrument,
But not as a solo.
As a solo instrument, is still gaining its place in the world. I mean, you can say everybody identifies immediately with a violin solo, but is not very common to hear a double bass solo. Even when a conductor schedules a bass concerto, he's taking a challenge. He's taking a challenge with the orchestra that he's programming with, the audience that is going to come and listen to the concert, because he can play safe and say only booked piano soloists and violin soloists and flute soloists, and he will be safe that way. Or sometimes they take the challenge and schedule and program a bass concerto, and it's more and more happening nowadays, but it's a challenge.
What music do you like to play best? From what epoch?
Well, I'm a romantic by nature. I like romantic music from the Romantic period, and also tonality is one of my favorite things. I identify. And as a solo instrument, on my part, it's a challenge. That I have to take a contemporary work sometimes into big concert associations where the audience and the public pay considerably on their tickets to go and listen to you. So you have to be very careful in how you program the pieces. I'm sure composers will hear what I'm saying right now, and I will be getting blackmail in a few months. But in any case, you always balance the program as I do it on the performance. Start with romantic music, something usually on the major composers, and then move into a lighter part of the repertoire, showing the virtuoso side of the instrument, the conditions that the instrument can sing and play a beautiful sound too. But most people are very familiar with the thumping pizzicato of the instrument, or those big sounds in the symphony orchestras, those big harmonic floors that you hear from the bass. But sometimes they get taken by surprise. All of a sudden, double bass can do these beautiful melodic lines, and actually sometimes performing those virtuoso passages that they seem impossible because of the distance of the instrument.
What kind of technical skill is required to play a double bass solo versus in an orchestra? You talked about making the shift from playing in an orchestra to kind of playing more solo type stuff. Did that involve any change in practice techniques for you or anything like that?
Everything on the instrument and in any string instrument involves a lot of practicing. And you see the instrument has no frets, no keys. So it's a very slow process of learning the instrument. I hope pianists will forgive me, or a flute player will forgive me, but once you have keys, the learning process is a lot faster. In a couple of years, you can be a fairly decent clarinetist, but you're nothing on the double bass yet. And it takes its time, because obviously there's a lot of practice involved to master the technique to be expressive on a black piece of wood.
I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask how much do you practice? How many hours a day would you say?
As much as I can put in.
Well, you're a professor of music at the University of Georgia, and you have students too. So we need to know that.
You have a full day of
a
full day of teaching. You go home. You have a family when I'm not traveling, and then after you share your family time, then I go to my room and I get practicing, and I'm working on the new compositions. I get in the last 10 years or 11 years, I'm getting a lot of new compositions. So I'm always preparing a new piece that was written for me, and it has a scheduled performance coming up, and then you have to dedicate time to that.
So you said after your family time.
Yeah.
So at night.
But during for example, when I come to my office at the university, I come early enough, and I get part of my practice done that way. Then I take care of my students, and then after that, I usually do my practicing at night, late on the day.
Milton, you had a concert last fall in October, and I was there. It was a wonderful concert, and Daniel was there. So could you tell us a little bit about it? What went into your selection of the pieces and what you performed?
Well, this was a special concert that came on on the light of a performance I had to do in Paris that I did in November. And some of the pieces were requested by the French to be performed on that series, so might as well do it at the university before my departure. And involved some Baroque, classical, and something I have done a lot of research for obvious reasons on my background pushes. I did a lot of research on Brazilian music and Argentinian music, and I always tend to put those composers there because very few people does and demonstrate that those compositions for the solo double bass.
So this was a kind of international repertoire that you were showing?
I included composers from Georgia for that particular reason.
Really?
I was taking composers from Brazil, from Argentina, and from Italy, from all the way from Botticini to Paganini to composers from the University of Georgia. I like to show that variety. Usually composers focus on that tonality, that romanticism, and bring it to Europe is something I usually like to show where I come from, where I am at, and show that mixing of composers to the audience. And it's fascinating. People tend to identify that flavor.
And you had a tango piece in there,
There was also,
as I recall.
Yeah, there was also a tango piece. We did compositions by Piazzolla on the performance, and several other composers. And those are things that I usually liked very much in France, in Italy, in Spain, in the United States, in Asia, or Latin America, obviously. So there are composers very much appreciated and helps the audience to get introduced to this large instrument. When you perform something that they can identify, and at the same time they have the enjoyment of seeing this instrument at work. That is so different.
And what was it that you played?
We had on that composition we had Piazzolla, we had Paganini, we had Leonard Ball, composer from the University of Georgia. We had Brazilian composers from Villa-Lobos. We had also a composer from São Paulo, Rio, from a composer from Buenos Aires, and among others. But as I said, that tries to bring all this flavor of different cultures, and again wrap up again into the UNESCO Artists for Peace, where you, through music, you bring different cultures together. And as an ambassador, I'm considered an ambassador on the UNESCO terms. You bring the music to different people for them to identify and talk to you afterwards.
Do you have any particular favorite styles or flavors, as you said, of music to play?
Oh, as a musician, you tend to represent, we're human beings and we have moods ourselves. There are some times that you like to perform something from the River Plate, that would be Uruguay or Argentina, or something that is northern Brazilian, more tropical, totally different culture, or somebody more temperamental, Italian, or something that involves a more restrained German. Or
so you basically have to fit it into...
You try to do a sampler. It's when you go to a restaurant, you have all this menu of different flavors, and you try to put them together, so you have a little bit of everything on the menu. I usually don't try to go, this program is going to be just German,
right,
or this program is going to be just American. I try to bring as many flavors as possible into my performance. That's a characteristic that I like to bring. And
you also bring your students into your performances.
Yes,
tell us a little bit about your teaching.
Well, believe it or not, the next year is going to be my 30th year of teaching at an university.
At this university?
Not at this university. I started in Brazil when I was 19. So I was very young at the time. I have to grow a beard very fast, I remember, because most of my students were older than I was when I started teaching. But as a professor, you try to bring all the symphony, solo repertoire, technique, all the elements, so the student would be able to transmit, defend themselves, and be a professional coming out. There are many ways of making music, from chamber music, solo to orchestral, and you have to give the student all those capabilities.
When you're teaching your students, do you have a set goal that you're maybe trying to pass on the double bass as a solo instrument to them, or are you more concerned that they...
I'm more concerned that they will be able to be resourceful and they will be able to work with the instrument. To be honest with you, I'm being honest with the student. Solo career is very difficult. Principally the bass is very unusual. Very few people will actually, to get to the point where I'm doing 50 solo performances a year like I'm doing right now, it's very rare. I mean, most bass players will do a couple of recitals a year or some other, but to get to that point, and I'm very specific with the students. So some of them, you see that they're going to be educators. That's what they want to do. They would like to perform the instrument, teach. Some others will love to be symphony players, and that's their set of goal, and we try to explore that in each instrument, in each student. The students, you are like a doctor. You give them the medicine for their different problems, and you try to bring out what is their, the condition is going to be. Some will be soloists, some won't.
Thank you very much. We've really enjoyed talking with you, and thank you, Daniel, for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Craige and Dr. Masciadri.
It's been my pleasure.
We've enjoyed it a lot.
Okay.
Think Forward. Think Research Channel.